On Wednesday, Saudi Arabia joined the list of countries to impose a travel ban on foreign travelers originating from Nigeria due to the Omicron COVID-19 variant. This came as Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos State warned of the onset of the fourth wave of the pandemic as infections rise even among persons who have been vaccinated. Now joining us to tell us what the latest scientific studies are saying about the highly transmissible Omicron variant and what we should be doing to stem the tide of the fourth wave is Professor Nicaise Ndembi, Senior Scientific Advisor to the Director of African Center for Disease Control and lead of the AU Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacture. Professor Ndembi also serves as the Director of Laboratory Research at the Institute of Human Virology, Nigeria. Welcome to the show, Professor Ndembi, and great to have you. I just want to ask you, what does the science say about the Omicron variant? I mean, some exit studies, albeit very small sample sized because it was just done in a couple of hospitals out of Gauteng province in South Africa, talks about the fact that it's not as virulent as other strains. In fact, hospitalization and need for oxygen rate is limited compared to the Delta variant. Is that the science as regards this?
Good. First, I'm delighted to be here. So thank you so much for inviting us, Africa Union and Africa CDC. The first thing I'm just going to mention is that mutations are not uncommon for viruses. So it's quite important that we keep that at the back of our mind. The very clear example is HIV. HIV, you have more than 1,000 strains. I say 1,000. If you've gotten 1,000 strains, it's due to the fact that the virus keeps mutating due to pressure. And when it moves from one person, which we call the donor, to a recipient, a lot of things will happen in the body as part of that immune response to generate more mutations. More so when we put in pressures like drugs, vaccines, you get more strains that will emerge. And it has also been shown from preliminary studies from South Africa as well that HIV-infected individuals that are not responding to their treatment can be a reservoir of SARS-CoV-2 and can accumulate mutations. So the reason why I'm putting that into context is that we're going to be seeing more variants in the next coming days. So Omicron is the next, and there will be the next one. And the more and more the virus will spread, we're going to have more variants. So now, what do we know? I think the good news we know, as from yesterday published, is that at least there's no significant impact on the vaccine efficacy, at least for Pfizer vaccines for now. I can say that because we have data for that particular product. And you can rest reassured that most of these vaccines, we're going to look at the second generation for these vaccines to be able to mitigate the impact of some of these mutations on the spread of the virus so as to control this acute phase of the pandemic. Thank you, and over to you. So in terms of pathogenesis, in terms of severe disease and mortality, we still do not have enough data to be able to substantiate it at this point. Thank you, over to you.
Well, we seem to have contradictory reports based on initial research, particularly from Big Pharma. CEO Moderna, about a week ago, said that, look, existing vaccines may not be able to handle this particular variant called Omicron. Yesterday, Pfizer and BioNTech, Bula, the CEO of Pfizer, came up with a point that, well, if we take a fourth jab, 12 months after the third, it will be able to work with Omicron. Now, I see some contradiction there between what Moderna CEO is telling us and what the Pfizer CEO is telling us. Do you see a problem in terms of coordination? That's one. The second point, you say, well, the virus will continue to mutate and that, we could even have a variant, another variant with peculiar characteristics after Omicron. Well, this mutation that everyone talks about, you are a scientist, is there a genetic endpoint? And would there be a genetic endpoint with this particular coronavirus?
Good point. I think what we need to also really in our discussions with respect to specifically SARS-CoV-2 and the vaccines, there are two things. We're dealing with the two you just listed at mRNA vaccines. So we know there's a waning immunity after 6 months. Even the second dose, we don't have enough information on the booster for now. And it's quite important because some of these R&D team, they still have to do some groundwork. And you can do some simulation, some modeling, and say, well, if those mutations are this particular pocket, this may actually have severe impact on the vaccine's efficacy. But as I speak, we don't have enough information. And it's quite important. I mean, based on data from the second dose from countries that have really extensively rolled out and very good coverage uptake. Specifically, again, on mRNA vaccines, we've seen that it's quite clear that you need not just even the booster, but again, we don't know exactly what will be the magnitude of that impact on the new strains. There's still some neutralization assays, some additional assays that they need to be conducted at lab level. But as I've said earlier, we do have data from South Africa already showing that there's a change, but not the magnitude is not as much as we expected. Because remember, again, that's quite critical for a vaccines to receive U.S. FDA or any stranger regulatory authority. They really have to get just 50% efficacy is enough to get it approved by any regulators. That's for SARS-CoV-2. For COVID-19 vaccines. So if you get Moderna, you still have maybe you are there up to 94% plus, or Pfizer there, and Omicron can only reduce it by 20%. We're still good. We're still within the range, and that is acceptable within this current pandemic. So it's quite important that we put in the context, one. Second, that we keep on really in our discussions as journalists, that's very important, that this virus will keep on mutating. Now, the end point, very good question, is that there are some of these mutations can definitely have an impact on transmissibility, but no significant impact, at least on what we've seen, severe mortality and then hospitalization. So we need to be sure that we have that trade-off very clear in our discussion. So there are two types of mutations. Mutation that will increase transmissibility. There are some of these mutations that will probably reduce that transmissibility, but more pathogenic. We've seen that in several other infectious diseases, including HIV. You look at HIV subtype C, which is the most predominant virus across the globe. It's more transmissible. But if you look at subtype D, in terms of pathogenesis, it's not more transmissible, but those who get subtype D are more likely to die faster than those that got infected with subtype C. I think it's a general concept that we really have to be really looking into, amplifying, but with really big caution, because you can't control the virus. If the virus is actually moving, if we're moving the other way around, the virus keep on moving as well. And if keep on mutating, it means that we're going to be having different donors and recipients, and then there will be different characteristics of the virus moving forward. The virus is not static. As well move from one individual to the other, the immune system is different. There will be selective advantage or not. That will lead to another transmission, getting probably a more pathogenic or more transmissible virus. So those are the contextual fact and basic science that we need to keep behind it. And then also you have to be also take some of these comments from manufacturing with a pinch of salt, so that we keep focus on the response during the acute phase of this pandemic. But the bottom line here is that we need to get our people vaccinated. I'm in charge of the COVID-19 vaccines at the African Union, but the numbers are not quite encouraging. Less than 10% of the African population fully vaccinated. I think that's not encouraging. So the more we actually get vaccinated, the more we stop at some level the spread of the virus, we minimize those risks in terms of waves. These waves are going to happen. We've seen that on influenza. It's seasonal. We don't know what COVID, so we better get vaccinated. That's the message, regardless of the variants. I think it's very important that that's the message we keep and actually disseminate out there. So I think that's the powerful public health message that we put out there for our policymakers, so that, and then also community leaders, so as to encourage people to get vaccinated. to be sure that we have good risk communication and community engagement strategy for to increase our absorptive capacity. I think that's most important. Thank you. I think that's a very insightful question.
And yet, the global response from a lot of Western governments has not been about ramping up vaccine distribution or manufacturing. It's been more about travel bans and red lists. What's your comment on that response to the Omicron variant?
No, absolutely, madam. I think we issue a statement from the African Union, and for those that have been following this space, President His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa made a very strong and powerful comment here. We have to be respectful of partnership. When I say respectful, the same will apply to member states, head of state. I think it's unacceptable that at the cutting edge, where Africa really showing to the rest of the world that we have the science here, we can speak, we have the science. I think if you recall again, for AstraZeneca, the same thing happened, and it was South Africa that came up and said, look, these vaccines, we have an issue here with the strain that are currently circulating in countries. The second thing again is coming with Omicron. We got it. We're saying to the rest of the world, this is what's happening. And then the only thing we can do is shut down our borders. This is not the way we have to deal in this current environment. We have to deal with data and be sure that we use other measures to be able to mitigate the spread of a virus. It's unacceptable. So I think we as Africans, we are responding to that and very positively. I think in the next coming days and so, we're issuing other couple of statements to be able to be sure that we, other member states, I mean, European member states and others will lift those bans so as to ensure movement of individuals across the globe. But again, it's a call for the continent. Get vaccinated. The next thing is those who don't get vaccinated will not be able to travel. That's the signal. Let people get vaccinated. Then at the African Union, using our convening power, we should be able to use that to be able to drive a little bit diplomacy around that to lift those bans. I think you also recall the issue of vaccines being administered on the continent but not recognized. We issued a powerful statement from the African Union, and that was lifted. So we're taking it each step at a time, and we're able to address those concerns. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So real quickly, number one is you're in Kigali because Africa is trying to see how it can get on the frontier of vaccine production. What are the things we need? That's number one. Number two will be about vaccine equity. So AU Vaccine Delivery Alliance co-chair Ayoade Alakija wrote an op-ed on Financial Times 2 days ago, as she talked about the vaccine inequity going on in the world. And she also challenged the temerity of the West to put off travel bans when they have not distributed vaccines equitably. And also a story came out in the wires yesterday in Nigeria about how most of the vaccines they had given to us had gotten to the end of their shelf life, their expiration dates, and how Nigeria had to waste over 1 million vaccines. As we're speaking about that, millions of vaccines came in more from other sources, America and the likes. How do we ensure that we're not giving almost expired vaccines, or like Tunde will call them, 5 minutes to expire vaccines?
No, I think you guys are making very good investigations and very on point here. We issued before the statement of his minister on the 29th of November from my office, a communique around vaccine donations. Okay? And we made it very clear. We have articulated in 5 points we're going to share with your colleagues. Is around the quality of the donation. What Nigeria is facing currently is not a good PR for the country. But the point is not Nigeria. It's the donation that we've received with very short shelf life. No one was there to tell us these are 4 weeks expiry date or 2 weeks expiry date, and then we accepted it. I mean, that's diplomacy. But moving forward, the African Union, I'm going to share, as I've said, that statement, we've made it very clear. Because that is overstretching our health system, because we're going to now start running to get these vaccines to the arm of people rather than probably planning adequately the vaccination strategy or delivery strategy. It's not good. You have Moderna expiring in 6 months. You have Pfizer expiring in 2 months. The X vaccine expiring. Then you don't really focus on the measures to mitigate or to deploy those vaccines to people's arms. But you're now chasing the vaccine that will be expiring. It's not good. It's not good for our image. And we told those donors, thank you so much. But please, next time, really being respectful again. I'm using that because it's part of the new public health order. Respectful partnership. I don't think we're going to do the same to other member states in other countries across the globe. So it's very important that we go into Africa with a very good mind that this vaccine is going to be used and then they are going to serve that purpose. These are extremely important commodities and goods. And then now it's on Nigeria now to say we're putting the blame on the country. No, we're not accepting that. Again, it's unacceptable. I'm quite frank. I'm just telling you that because we have discussed that extensively. And if you look at the communique, it's quite clear. Several other stakeholders playing key roles in the vaccine delivery have also endorsed that statement. So now on in terms of sources, donations represent only one of those ones. We do have the Africa Vaccines Trust from the African Union. You have the COVAX facility. We have bilateral deals between member states and member states that could be between Nigeria and the UK, and they can get those doses. Donation is just one of those ones. Now the question is the deep dive among all those sources. And now explanation there for those donations is one thing that we've flagged already. We have resolved that. But now the remaining three sources, how are we managing that? I think we need to play a key role here and see how we can get these vaccines out there. One thing is really to be able to get a very strong and reliable vaccinations platform out of the current routine immunization. We have said it over and over. You can use the current or write on the current or leverage on the current vaccination program to administer COVID-19 vaccine. We've said it. And the African Union, we're going to be probably visiting the country, Nigeria, to support in setting up vaccination centers across the globe through our $1.3 billion US dollar grant from MasterCard Foundation to support member states get these vaccines into people's arms. I think that's our next steps. I think we're working closely with other partners. I think that's the most positive news I can give around solutions on how to get this vaccine to people's arms. Thank you.
Well, you are the lead for the AU partnership on African vaccine manufacturing. And there was that reference to the PAVM event in Kigali, Rwanda. Now, what are the challenges that you think African countries face in terms of partnership, cooperation with regard to vaccine manufacturing? The WHO itself has identified Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, and South Africa as possible hubs. Some of the countries on their own have made efforts, like Egypt, like South Africa. But what are the challenges that we face? What are the prospects? And how can all of that, tweak the balance, tilt the balance in terms of how Africa stands in the race for vaccination, and vaccine equity?
Again, I think the set of questions, the previous question, really are setting the stage for this particular question, which is around sustainability and global health security. 99% of our vaccines currently being used on the continent are not produced on the continent. Only 1%. So if you look at it now, this is not really a good and really pattern. So the PAVM, the Partnerships for Africa Vaccine Manufacturing, which is under the second pillar of the continental strategy. By the way, we have a continental strategy on COVID-19 vaccines. The first pillar is around clinical trials. How do we ensure that we have at least undertaking clinical trials to be able to defend findings from those clinical trials? It's very important. If, let's say, you go to Abeokuta or you go to, let's say, FCT, you undertake a clinical trials, you have 3,000 people there, and after the clinical trials, they're all safe, they can speak about the product, that will increase vaccine acceptability. or acceptance and reduce vaccine hesitancy. We are not part of these clinical trials. That was one key element that we said, let's be part of it. There's a network of best scientists that are actually leading that work stream. Then the second pillar is around acquisition. We've actually been able to acquire close to 500 million doses. The continent will require about 900 million doses. Through African Union, this is the first time we're finding African solutions to African problems, not waiting for donations. And you can see the donations, the quality of the donations. If we're expecting those donations, they will come in late, and with really very short shelf life, with no options, and the blame will be on us, as usual. So now what is happening, we actually had to develop an instrument, which is called the African Vaccine Trust. We secured $2 billion US from the continent, and to be able to acquire those vaccines. We got about 400 million doses that were announced a couple of months ago. And then we have another 110 million doses that we're expecting. Then that will make us really come closer to our target. But that will enable us only vaccinate about 31% of our population. We're expecting, on average, between 27% from the COVAX facility. And I mentioned to you the bilateral deals and then now the donations. So those are actually the four sources. Now, you can't continue, if you look at my breakdown in terms of sources, to rely on those external partnerships, which they never probably sometimes come to friction. So we said it's probably the time. This is the best moment in the history of the continent to now really activate our vaccine manufacturing ecosystem. So you've listed a few of the countries in the Northern Africa, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria. Really, made remarkable progress. As I speak, I was in Egypt. They can produce over 20, or they have already produced 20 million of the Sinovac vaccines. Morocco is doing the same. Algeria is doing the same. Then we a little bit in the south, eastern, Western Africa, Nigeria has a huge potential. Again, we're planning to meet with the authorities in the coming weeks to discuss the strategy. Ghana, the same. The Institute Pasteur of Dakar. In the east, we have already Rwanda, you mentioned, with BioNTech, into an agreement with Rwanda and Senegal. Southern Africa is just remarkable. The J&J vaccine currently being distributed across the continent are from Aspen, South Africa. They got a licensure with Janssen. I think we're making progress. We have capacity. I've been to South Africa. I visited all the vaccine manufacturing facilities. I've been to Egypt. So I can speak to you exactly and say we have the potential. But now there are some challenges and bottleneck to come to your questions. And there are some enablers that African Union, Africa CDC, through the partnerships for Africa vaccine manufacturing, we're trying now to be able to unlock some of those barriers, including financing. We need to be sure that we encourage the entrepreneurs to be able to invest into that, make it really, really attractive to entrepreneurs. The regulatory environment, okay, as we speak, only 2 countries have achieved maturity level 3, for not even for vaccine production. So, and those countries have spent 5 years to get there. I've just alluded to Egypt, already having their own vaccines with them. But they cannot move it out because they have to wait for WHO, EQL, and PQ and EUL to be able to export those vaccines. This is unacceptable. We need, as a continent, to find solutions to unlock it. The African Continental Free Trade Area, you're aware of it. We need to move those goods across the continent, or more so during this pandemic. Then, if you look at it, you look at infrastructure, research and development. How do we encourage the young scientists somewhere in probably one of these universities, maybe in Sokoto, to go into that vaccinology, learn? Because there's no prospect now. But if you make it a very good and attractive environment, I'm sure people are going to go and probably invest into that space for apprenticeship, and then build their own research and capacity to be able to move in that space. Then issues around the market design and demand intelligence that I mentioned to you earlier, the regulatory that I mentioned, or also R&D, talent development, access to finance, infrastructure, Those are the challenges. But we have been able to come up with a framework for action, which is going to be shared, we'll share, as I mentioned, with each AU member state. They're going to use that probably to unlock some of those challenges that we've seen moving forward, and also be sure that we use grants that have been provided by some of the partners to drive that vaccine manufacturing ecosystem on the continent. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Ndembi, for sharing your views with us. Thank you very much indeed.